Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Collabs. And this is where we dive into the art and science of collaboration with leaders shaping the future of industries. Now, today, I am super excited to introduce Laura Beyer, Head of Partnerships at TED, specifically brand partnerships. Laura is someone with a wealth of experience in building strategic, long term partnerships and ultimately revolutionizing how collaboration intersects with business development and sales. Laura has led partnerships with world renowned brands like BCG, which is the Boston Consulting Group, Marriott, and Target. And this is all while ensuring TED's mission of sharing ideas worth spreading stays at the core. With nearly 2 decades of marketing and partnerships experience, Laura's unique approach to creating meaningful collaborations speaks directly to anyone looking to merge strategy, creativity, and impact. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Thank thank you for having me. I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite topics. So I love this. I'm happy to be here.
Amazing, amazing. It's been a long time coming, and here we are. So I'd love to start with this question, which is, what excites you most about collaboration, especially given your experience at TED and all the dynamic partnerships that you've built over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm very much a marketer by trade. That is my passion, is marketing and brands. And so I think to me, partnerships is about merging two great brands, two great strategies to create something much larger. And so I really think about it from a marketing and business standpoint. I think there's real power in partnerships. And I came into TED with this goal of being able to work across different industries and get kind of exposure to a lot of different brands. And so the kind of connection to be made between two great brands to me is very exciting.
I know, I can imagine it. I mean, Ted, you've wow. I'm just excited for this conversation. I mean, I'm a kid in a candy store. All right, one of my favorite brands and favorite people, honestly, with just watching you from afar and all the amazing things you all have done, the different versions of TED and all these amazing things. So kudos to you and the team. I know it's
Thank you.
usually in the world of partnerships, you're behind the scenes, right? So people see all these amazing companies and amazing brands, and then the communications team is all over the PR release, right? And the
Yeah.
people like yourself and your team working day in, day out, sometimes over many years, right?
Yep.
Really don't
Yeah.
get any
And
sort of
what's
publicity.
interesting about TED is, people often don't know that we are a nonprofit and we're actually really scrappy. So it's, we're about 200, 250 people maybe at TED. And so what is very cool about my role and my team's role is that we don't have a massive engine behind this. And
Mhm.
so you get to do a lot of the ideation and strategy and creativity and all the conversations yourself. So I'm very much in the weeds on a lot of things, which is actually really, really exciting. It's not, a huge bureaucracy, which is really nice.
Very nice. I mean, I've worked in corporate cultures in tech, and for what you all are doing, again, you're punching up there with many of these, global platforms with tens of thousands of employees, right? And
Yep.
I don't know what the data shows. However, I would assume that if you looked at, views and length of time watched and all those metrics, you're probably up there, with these global behemoths, like you said,
Yeah.
thousands of
Yeah.
employees. So that's very impressive.
Yeah. I like to refer to it as this intersection. We are a nonprofit, and so we have a mission and we stay true to that mission. And that's why the brand has been successful over time. But we're also very much a media organization. If you think of the landscape, we create content, we publish it on digital platforms, we have advertising, we do events. So we are actually very much in the league of the big media companies. But we have to kind of balance the line between nonprofit mission, impact oriented, and the need to obviously operate and kind of bring in funding to allow us to do the work we do. So that line that we walk is it's both challenging, but it also leads to, I think, great things, and kind of gives us this unique edge in the market. So yes, we are definitely in that league. People think of us in a lot of different ways, so they don't always think of us as a media company. We do a lot of education to brands around what we do, but overall, people usually come to TED with this kind of admiration and love and respect for the work we do, which just kind of helps us start conversations on a really positive note.
Yeah, I mean, people's eyes light up when you say TED. I ask people like, "Where's TED?" I mean, yeah, of course, right? They gravitate
Yes.
toward the ethos, and it's interesting because I had another gentleman that we talked to, Jorge Vargas, and so he's at the Wikimedia Foundation, right? And so it was interesting because he came from a legal background as a lawyer, and now he's in charge of partnerships at Wikimedia, which is, to your point, the nonprofit that powers Wikipedia, right?
Cool.
So there's also a very fine balance between, especially when we talk about information, right,
Yeah.
in the digital age. So let's,
Yeah.
before we dive any deeper, let's take a step back. So you've had an impressive career, of course, leading brand partnerships of TED. Can you share your journey? So from your time in the
Yeah.
private sector, you were in marketing, right, to becoming head
Yeah.
of TED. How did your experience at organizations like Sudler and Hennessy and Genentech shape your partnership approach?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm definitely a marketer by trade. That's my pure passion, and so I knew that very early on. And I started my career in advertising. I thought that was the kind of core, like where to build from, where to start from. So advertising in New York, which is very iconic. Um, and then I was kind of really hungry for growth, and so I went to business school pretty early on in my career. I was one of the youngest. In my class. And so I went to Georgetown, the McDonough School of Business down here in DC, which is where I live now. And I focused on marketing, but I was struggling with this concept of committing to one brand, one product for my career. And so as I was looking to kind of post business school career, I was struggling with that concept. I didn't really want to pigeonhole myself, which is kind of ironic given my position now. So um, this role at TED came up, and basically, we've grown a lot since then. But my boss at the time, the man who hired me, he tasked me with come in, create big, cool, crazy partnerships with big brands, and I was like, I mean, that feels like such a sign that this is the perfect role for me. And I hadn't thought of TED in that capacity, but I had always really admired the organization. So I kind of took the plunge, moved to New York, and started at TED. And so I started in our version of business development. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I started in a role that was go out there, find brands, strategize, like create some cool things. And so it was really open ended, really creative. Um, and so through, in those early years, I was on the ground doing the work of creating these partnerships for probably 3 to 4 years. I think I've been at TED for now 9. With my business background, so coming from business school, I had kind of the operational side, the finance side, and so TED is a nonprofit. It's not a traditional business, and so I started just kind of like grasping onto some operational things, some financial things, and so I kind of grew through the ranks in my team and started managing, started overseeing things, and then about I guess now 2.5 years ago, um, I was promoted into this role of head of partnership. So I think that being said, I came into this. Um, I, I was able to kind of put myself into the shoes of those on the other side of the table. I was a marketer. I was from the business world. And so I think that's where I kind of gained success early on. I had never been in sales, never been in business development, never had to really convince anyone to buy anything. And I think that actually worked in my favor and is how I think about partnerships as a whole. So that, I've spent the majority of my career now here at TED, which has been really interesting. But I've been very external and been able to work with countless brands, so many smart people. And so it's been a really interesting side of the business.
That's so interesting and funny story. I don't know if you recall this gentleman, Manish Padir. Yes, he
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
you went to business school with him, and so I met Manish. Funny enough, when I
Yes. Oh my gosh,
yeah,
what a
so
small world.
I mean, it's a tiny world. So Manish moved to Ghana. He's back in LA now. Oh well, San Francisco, and yeah, I met him there, and we've become very good friends. Such that even when I was organizing TEDx Accra, he was on the team. He was in charge of
Uh-huh.
accounting, right? And so it's just, I mean, wow,
Yeah,
the world is so tiny, and he
small
definitely
world.
remembers you, speaks well of you, speaks highly of you, and remembers just how, focused and determined you were in business
Yeah.
school. So obviously,
What's funny about that is, and I hear this a lot. It was my first real kind of like interaction with TED was in business school, because a lot of the professors used TED Talks in different classes. So like Amy Cuddy's, power poses, that was in our kind of communications class. So I got this exposure to TED. I didn't even think about it, but it was powerful to me, and I kind of brought that through. So my, I think, I always consider my job. I sit in this incredible organization doing this incredible work, but I am a business mind behind it. And so how do I kind of leverage those skills to help the organization grow? And so I really love the intersection of those two things, and got kind of access to TED early on. So that is my story.
that is so interesting. And you actually answered the next question. I was going to ask you how what your MBA experience influenced how you strategize and build meaningful connections with corporate partners.
I have
And
so many thoughts on this. I'm a big promoter of business school. I think business school is really valuable, especially those that really kind of know that they want to do this. The thing that I always tell people, and I share a lot of these insights with my team, is business school teaches you how to think through problems, how to kind of framework issues. Business school, it's a big feeder into the consulting world. So it's, how do you start? What do you think about? How do you 4x4 the problem? And I that is something that I use daily in my work with my team, with companies. Like I try to be really practical in how to think through problems, not just creative, not just kind of blue sky thinking, but I think that really factored into this. And I try to kind of bring all of those things into my work and to help share that kind of knowledge with my team.
that's super interesting. Let's actually dive into that. So there's this interesting nexus between in collaboration between business development and sales. And so something that stood out, I guess, from our previous conversations is how you position collaboration at the intersection between these two. So like a Venn diagram, right? You have sales, you
Yeah.
have biz dev, and then partnerships is in the middle, right? So could
Yeah.
you break down this idea for our listeners? So how can collaboration drive business development and sales while staying authentic to the organization's mission, right? Like Ted, that's
Yeah.
a very challenging
Yeah.
conundrum that you deal with and have dealt with pretty well.
Yeah. So this is such an important point to me, and not that I'm novel in this, but I do think that because we are a nonprofit, this becomes more relevant. So sales is kind of on the short term spectrum. You have revenue goals and you're trying to close sales. It's kind of more product focused. Business development is generally considered the long term. How do we grow markets? How do we kind of build these really long term relationships? My team, I need them to be at the center of this. They have to do both. They have to have an eye on target revenue goals, but they also have to approach partners in a really strategic long term way. So to me, what that means is that you kind of have to be a jack of all trades. You have to understand um, how to pitch and persuade people, how to close a sale, like in sales. But you also have to be really business savvy and deeply, deeply understand what the person on the opposite side of the table is going through, what their business objectives are. And so, if there's one thing that I would leave everyone listening with, is you have to immerse yourself in your partner's world so deeply. You have to understand, like, their audience becomes your audience, their goals become your goals. And it's kind of like consulting on a kind of broader scale, but you have to be an extension of their team. And I firmly believe that that is what creates trust, not in a kind of surface level way, but trust from a business standpoint is brought about by this kind of shared commitment to each other's goals and understanding of each other's business. And it's a two-way street. So this partnerships kind of intersection, I think, is a combination of all those things that make up sales and business development, but it really is immersing yourself in their world. And it's creating kind of a win-win situation for both of you, based on business goals. And it's a really kind of, it's a businessy response, and there's creativity and there's passion and all the things that kind of make up a partnership. But I do think that, you know, uh, I read something that's, deals live or die by the ROI. So at the end of the day, one of the things that I always tell new people on my team, people come to us and they love TED. They admire TED. They want to support TED. They can't just invest money based on love and passion for what we do. That's not a savvy business decision on their end. They need this to be relevant. It needs to be valuable to them. And so, that is what kind of gets you past that initial exciting conversation, is making sure that it's actually valuable for your business partner on the other side of the table.
That is so insightful, and it speaks to something that I track in my business as well, which is definitely ROI, especially coming from the world of finance. We'll get to that with Northwestern, but also return on time, right? Return on time spent is a
Yeah.
metric that we track in our business, because I think also when you're working with customers, enterprises or not, working with Airbnb and Delta Airlines, and all these other corporations, I've learned that the biggest thing is also you're dealing with a person. To your point, right? This is a person. They may be married, not married, single. They may be in any stage of life, but they value their time, right? And so, to
Mhm.
your point, how do you create a situation where also, we can, if possible, because sometimes it's not possible, really also, make sure that, for example, this company, once I understand their goals, ultimately they are, measured. They are, evaluated. They have, annual check-ins, quarterly check-ins, in terms of job performance, company performance. And so one cool thing I've always thought through was, okay, what if we can reposition this from an ROI and a time stance? So major company wants to achieve this goal. There's all these other ways and marketing initiatives they can do, right, to achieve that goal. But when you think about, TED and just the gravitas of the brand, and how much quicker you could achieve your goal, right, by collaborating with TED, that's probably, something to think through too, because I can see
Yeah.
how by working with TED, you are catapulted into this world of thought leaders, right? Innovators, designers, creatives, and
Yeah.
so depending on the kind of brand positioning you're looking for, it's a real smart way to go. And so for me, just kudos to you. Thank you for explaining that, because I've always loved just what you all do. And yes, I do agree. Funny enough, I did a TEDx talk in Accra in 2015, and I saw that a professor had used it as part of a curriculum, and I was like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Amazing.
You know,
Yeah.
this is awesome. And so
Yeah.
let's shift gears to another subject that you speak about. So, 5 ways to cultivate meaningful collaborations. And so, I know you've outlined 5 ways to make this meaningful, right? Not just to say, hey, we collaborated. So, I find it fascinating because these are tactical strategies, right? It's not
Yeah.
just about
I'm all about
designing,
the tactics.
right?
Yeah.
And it
Yes.
also ties in philosophy as well, based on the principles. So I'd love to explore these with you. So let's start
Yeah.
with this idea of becoming a true extension of your partner, which you mentioned. And how does this approach differ from traditional partnerships models? And one final thought there, you said something that I love. You said jack of all trades. And I love the fact that it makes sense, right? Because it's also, I think I read the full thing. A jack of all trades is a master of none, but still much better than a master of one. And so when you think about the partnership people on your
Yeah.
team, this is what you're embedding in them. So back to the question,
Yeah.
how does this approach differ from traditional, from a traditional partnership model?
Yeah. So I think that in any position, sales, business development, any of these, everyone strives to do this in some way, right? Like consultative selling has become the word that most, I mean, I don't think I've ever met a salesperson that wouldn't consider them consultative seller. But I think what's different about this is that doing this takes time, resources, energy. You can't do this with 10 different partners at one time. You really have to commit. And I think what that means is that you have to prioritize who you're actually doing this with. And so I like to help my team say no when it's not the right alignment. When it's an uphill battle and you're pushing a boulder up a hill, that's not the time to kind of commit this level of I mean, consulting firms have 10 people that do this on projects. Like we have, we have 5 people doing this across a lot of different partners. So it's a lot about prioritization and understanding when is the right time to really dive in and do this and then commit yourself. And I think the result is a longer term relationship and a deeper relationship and more potential. I mean, there's a lot of things that I did when I was kind of in that role and I teach my team, but like, I mean, it's from the basics of just like constant research, constant understanding. But I think a lot of it is about being with them, being with their stakeholders and really listening. And there's a lot written and talked about the art of listening and actually listening. I don't think anyone does it as well as they could, but I think it really is about like actively listening for the things that are relevant to your conversation and just like committing yourself to it and prioritizing which ones you should be doing this with. It's not, it can't happen all the time, but I do think that's really important. I mean, it's shocking how many times just in this world, like people don't do research before getting on a call. That's just, I mean, it's not really acceptable these days to get on a call without understanding basics of what's happening in their world. And so this is just going kind of a layer deeper into that.
That's so interesting, and it's true, right? I remember to your point on listening, I was invited to a Synergos event. So Synergos is Peggy Rockefeller's foundation. This was in 20 pre-COVID, and in October of 2019. And one of the key things that they focus on is literally trust works, right? So building trust, and it takes, to your point, active listening. And what was interesting at this retreat was they had a specialist, and he talked about the 4 different listening methods, right?
Mm,
And the fourth one was super interesting. And so to give us an example, right? Because what is the fourth way to listen to people? So he got up and he invited Peggy Delaney Rockefeller, and they did not say a word to each other. What they did was they were mirroring each other's movements, which was, I know. So we're sitting in the audience, and so he would, for example, extend his arm, and then she would do a counter movement, and this went on for about 3-4 minutes, and it was in silence. And then afterwards they were candid with how they felt, and they felt a lot closer to each other without even knowing, well, technically they know each other's names, but it depicted how being able to mirror more than what the person is saying, right, is
yeah.
also a part of active listening. It's about mirroring maybe their body language or their body positioning, right? Just showing that we are aligned, and
Yeah.
sometimes you can, so if you take that fourth quadrant and then you layer it on top of these others, it's not always possible, right? In
Yeah.
every single situation, 10 out of 10. However, if you start with 2 out of 10 and work your way up, it was a very
Yeah.
interesting example of listening.
That is interesting because one of the things I always find interesting to just observe is the best salespeople or partnerships people are able to adapt to each person they talk to. And so, understanding that some people don't want to talk about the weather, when they start talking, and some want to just dive right in, like be able to react to that in real time and tailor your communication and how you're speaking to someone in real time, I think is a real skill, and is appreciated on the other side because, small talk works sometimes, often it doesn't. And so I love that kind of concept of mirroring because you really do have to like focus on like what are they trying to kind of get across in their communication style. I think that's really smart.
Yeah, it's true. And so you speak to this, the importance of the diversity in strategy. And so,
Yeah.
how do, in your opinion, diverse perspective enhance partnership strength and resilience?
Yeah. So that point is something that I find really unique about TED. TED has taught me this actually, is that perspectives can come from anywhere. And often it's really worth kind of looking outside of your field of vision to get inspired. And so things that you might think are like completely irrelevant to your world might actually inspire you or teach you something completely new. And so I try to mirror that in our partnerships where um, not having the kind of same set of voices, having different people weigh in and different strategies is really, I think, beneficial, especially as you're working on these bigger deals. You kind of want to have different people gut check, different people weigh in, and I think that diversity creates just bigger things. I think we often try to, certain people try to handle everything themselves, and they know what the best strategy is, and then you introduce a third party into it, and it creates something bigger and more magical. So I think it's just all about kind of unique perspectives in layering on a creative strategy.
And I believe I've seen great examples of that. I forget the company you worked with. It was it UPS or FedEx? But what was really exciting, at least about one of those partnerships, was how I believe the woman was a janitor, or it was something where I was shocked, right, that she was one of the people featured when the company decided to partner with Ted. And that to me
Mhm.
speaks to what you said, where, most people wouldn't think that, oh, maybe the janitor has anything worthy to say. But if you think about it, they're interacting with so many different aspects of the business and see so many things. And so I can imagine their perspective, to your point, being different from maybe a CEO or an office worker, but they're still
Yeah.
a part of the ecosystem that makes up that business.
Yeah.
So it's really about those insights. And
Yeah.
another key thing you mentioned is authenticity, which is another point that you've highlighted. So, how do you balance the need to be transparent and realistic with partners while maintaining this optimistic outlook on what's possible?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a thing that is very specific to Ted. And I've actually, I was always known for being the bad cop on calls, even with partners. I had no shame in this. So obviously in the advertising world, when you're creating crazy cool marketing campaigns, it's blue sky. It's like sky's the limit. We can do anything. And that is perfect. That's amazing. I love that atmosphere. I, that's who's creating like the crazy, crazy marketing campaigns. At TED, we have to be really, really realistic about what we can and can't do. And what we can't do is risk the brand, risk the mission, interfere with what has kind of made us consistently a strong, credible brand. And so there are things that are just kind of crossing the line that we can't do, that we ultimately shouldn't do. And so I believe strongly that being very upfront about that early on and not sugarcoating it to make the sale uh, is critical. And that's what leads to renewals and to people coming back and people staying our partner for many, many years. Um, is getting that out of the way early on and just being kind of fiercely transparent about it. So, authenticity in my mind is kind of paired with like realism. Like we have to be true to kind of ourselves and true to the brand and true to who we are. And we have to be really transparent about what that isn't at the same time.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Wow, this is just so much food for thought, Laura. Thank you so much for sharing so far. And so now we
Yeah.
have arrived at one of my favorite segments of the podcast. And so this is where we basically have a rapid fire section. It's called collaboration versus transaction. And so in this
Okay.
scenario, in this segment, I present to you four different scenarios, and I'd love for you to just tell us, if you see them as a collaboration or transaction and why. And in some cases, they could be both, right? I remember Danny from TikTok, he said, which was really interesting, sometimes a collaboration starts off as a series of smaller transactions, right?
So true.
This is true. And so let's start with scenario one. So in scenario one, a corporate brand donates a one time sum to a nonprofit without any further engagement. Is this a collaboration or more of a transaction?
I believe that it's a start of a collaboration. I think any big show of giving to any nonprofit, it has to start from somewhere, and you have to kind of prove yourself in order for it to become a longer term relationship. And so, to me, it's the start of a collaboration. Um, I definitely think that's where every single donor starts with us.
I love it. Love it. Love it. So, scenario two, a content creator and a brand collaborate on a campaign where both share creative control. Is this a collaboration or a transaction?
Definitely a collaboration. And I think that is, I think that's ideal. I mean, that's, that's what we do whenever we're partnering, is kind of share that control, and it makes it so that you're both invested in the outcome, and it doesn't feel to the audience like it's a transaction. So that to me is squarely collaboration.
Love it. Okay, scenario 3. A company agrees to sponsor an event in exchange for logo placements and ads. Is that a collaboration or a transaction?
So this is an interesting one. I talk a lot about this one because I refer to this as logo slaps, and I'm very cautious about logo slaps. Um, Even a brand like TED, where it actually is very valuable to be next to our brand, I still don't firmly believe that that's the best strategy for a brand. So while that might be an easy win for me, I don't think that it sets anyone up for real success later on. And so I would always try to have something a little bit deeper, even if it's just that it's the strategies around a really mission aligned kind of logo placement somewhere. That to me is more of a collaboration, but a logo slap to me is very transactional.
Love it. This is great insight, by the way. And then the final
Being
scenario,
very honest with you about all of these things.
and
Yes.
that's the name of the game, because these are scenarios that happen every day,
Yeah.
right? In so many
Yeah.
different industries. And I think, again, one of the goals for this podcast is, what are these scenarios? Or to your point, how do we think through what is a transaction and then make it a collaboration, right? To your point.
Yeah.
And ultimately that's the goal, especially with the creator economy being where it is. You're
Yeah.
seeing a lot more, brands, individuals engaging in collaborations around content. And it's become a logo slap in many cases. It's, hey, just pay me, I'll create content. Which, again, maybe that works, maybe that's the goal. But how do we
Yeah.
think a little bit deeper, beyond that, on both sides? And so our final scenario is, a brand partners with a platform like TED to create year-long content focused on social impact. Is that a collaboration or transaction?
Definitely a collaboration. Yes. Yes. And we do that. But definitely a collaboration. And I mean, a year long, I guess like the timing isn't as significant, but I do think when you move into creating a series of things where you can optimize and you can get better and you have to work together over time, that's always going to be a collaboration.
Love it. Love it. So Lauren, we know that not every collaboration is smooth sailing. I've had situations. I mean, the first time, my goodness. So when I worked or started, when I moved away from finance into media, I remember I pitched Vogue on coming to Ghana, and everything was going well. They were excited. They were happy. This was amazing. The day before we're flying to Ghana, they tell me, "Hey, we're thinking about canceling." What are you talking about? How? This is $15,000 later that we spent. It went through. Thankfully, I had to, jump in there and troubleshoot and call London and find someone at the embassy for a visa. It was a night. I mean, it was crazy, right? But it went through, and many years later, it was one of the things that they hold as a flagship moment, because they literally had 5 different stories on Vogue.com, which was crazy to me, right? I never would have imagined this being possible. It wasn't a smooth sailing. That's the point. It wasn't as easy as people maybe think it was, looking back now. So could you share one of the most challenging partnerships you've worked on and how you navigated? And of course, you don't have to mention names, right? But
Yeah.
just something that was really difficult and how you were able to navigate those difficulties.
So yes, you're totally right. I mean, the way I've described it is very idealistic, and there's definitely many cases in our world where things turn out to be these deeply strategic, successful, but that is definitely not always the case. So I'm going to reframe a little bit because uh, if I talk about challenging partnerships too deeply, we don't have that many, and so I don't want to. I'm not going to get. But I do think there's a common theme
Hmm.
here around challenging partnerships, and it is about how deals and relationships are set up. And so, one of the points that one of the things I really try to embody in my team is that a great partnership is built on an incredible idea, a creative idea with insanely thought out details. The two have to be intertwined. And that's where, especially with a scrappier team, it's a lot more work, it's a lot more effort, but in the long run, it's very, very beneficial. And so I think when partnerships, there's obviously there's the crazy things that happen, a business, something happens, and they on their end, there's out of their control kind of scenarios. But I think usually when there's challenges like this, it's because things were not set up correctly in a detailed way, asking, why are we doing this? How are we doing this along the way with every single piece? And it has to get so granular into the details so that when you get into the planning of it, everything just kind of rolls. You know exactly why and how you're doing each specific component. And I think when things are rushed or when things are not thought through, that's when these scenarios tend to happen. Your scenario sounded like it was a little bit more of a black swan situation, but I do feel like the granular detail that's required in planning upfront before commitment is even made is so important to kind of to push off those scenarios on the back end.
That's so true. And it's exactly that. I mean, this is so insightful because I'm thinking through and it was exactly that. The DOP got sick the day before and they started panicking, right? And because, it was also a whole new market. They'd never done anything in Ghana. It's like, we're not familiar. Can we do this? Right. And so it just became, to your point, the expert talking. And I think this happens a lot too, where when brands are entering new territory, and I'm sure for Ted, everyone loves Ted, but not many brands may know how to engage with Ted,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
it becomes this nervousness but excitement around it's uncharted terrain, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of what could be is so exciting, but then again, when especially larger corporations, they have, to your point, certain geographic areas they work in, certain industries they work in. They just have a
Yeah.
process that has made them successful. And so when
Yeah.
you kind of are going not against the grain, but in a new direction, it can get scary. And
Yeah.
so I guess,
Definitely. And most of many of our partners are new partners when we start out with them because people don't know how they can work with Ted. One thing I will say is, um, my team is made up of kind of four components. And so we have the pre deal strategy side, the people out there talking to brands. And then we have the post sale execution team. And that's a digital ad ops team. And it is an account management team. And the two of those are so deeply intertwined. The reason why and how we kind of prevent against those issues is we have an incredible post sale execution team, and they are obviously pros at how we actually execute on all these things, but they also are pros at how we troubleshoot and how we can navigate. We like those things always come up. And so that team has to be really savvy um in kind of crisis scenario planning and understanding how do we kind of bring them along in different routes. And Ted is not the most straightforward place to work with. I mean, we have rules and regulations and we have a brand to uphold. So there's a lot of education, and it all really does come down to the trust. If you have the relationship built and the trust built, and they trust that what you're saying in how we're going to pivot will actually pan out, then it's much easier. And so that team has to be really savvy at actually navigating those circumstances because those come up daily, for us.
yeah, customer success. It's
Yep,
definitely a thing that,
exactly.
I worked at a startup and that was one of the key things because I was in sales and, we realized we needed a customer success team because, bringing on the Grammys and bringing on all these brands is great,
Yeah,
right? But to your point, once they're closed, you need someone to nurture that relationship, which has to be different
yeah,
from the AE who's
yeah,
out there, chasing another deal. You need a customer success person to really just, nurture that
yeah,
relationship and check in and make sure that everything's and be proactive, right? To your point, do
yeah,
enough research where you are a part and extension of their team and you
yeah,
know what's happening. You can
yeah,
you can give them insights many times on what is happening that, sometimes
yeah,
people are so in the weeds they don't have time to,
yeah,
find out how the clock works, as you said earlier. They just want to know what
yeah,
time is it, right?
Well,
So you,
and
yeah,
the best actually internal collabs are the relationship between
yes,
the sales or the business development and the customer success or account manager. When you have a relationship between the two, I mean, for my early years at TED with the big partnerships I did, I had a counterpart. She now is leading our customer success team, Jackie, and she and I worked so well together that we became this kind of force. And our roles changed. At first when we were kind of pitching, I was kind of behind the strategy and she was kind of a support mechanism, and then it flipped and I was her support system on the back end. So I do think like internal collaborations like that are so key to these partnerships. This is not like a solo
yeah,
role, for sure. You need other people to kind of come along with you on the ride to be successful.
definitely. That's a great tip right there. The AECSM, account executive, customer service manager, or whatever they're called, relationship are key, right? They're
Yep.
literally, growing this relationship together. So let's
Yeah.
look at, and let's, coming to a culmination point, a wrap up. When we think about, your broad experiences and trends in collaboration, what are some of the key trends that excite you right now? And these could be digital platforms, they could be technology, it could be
Yeah.
shifts in corporate strategy, right? Where do you
Yeah.
see things heading in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about this before. I have so many examples of my favorite kind of collaborations and partnerships out there, um, that I think show trends. But my favorite of all time, I think the brand that does partnerships the best is Target. They're a partner of ours, but that is kind of beside the point. They're they do these kind of one-off collaborations with influencers, with other brands, where they bring in these kind of pop-ups or long-term product lines. And I think what they do really well is they know their audience and they know what their audience is looking for, what their audience is following and doing, and they identify those collaborators like before everyone kind of realizes that's what they need, and they create scarcity around it, which I think is very cool. The whole pop up culture that's happening, um, and so that's why like historic. I think they past, present, future have always been really great at this. The like a shameless plug. My brother started this aperitif company, and he did this collaboration with an influencer that is kind of a cocktail influencer. And I think this culture of influencers um, is going, obviously, it is and will be a huge thing. And I think the influencer world is really finding their footing and really being in control of the content, not just a vehicle for brands. And so I think um, there's that will be a trend, is how do those parties work together? I mean, it's the new spokespeople. Like back in the day, you had spokespeople. Like influencers are the new thing. So I think the more that those can become integrated and incredibly aligned in terms of the strategy, I think those can be really powerful forces. And then last one I'll say is not all partnerships are these splashy, crazy, wild, cool things, right? Like you can't have everything be that. And so I like to keep a pulse of what I deem the more common, the subtle, the interesting. So one that came up for me, I was watching the Kevin Hart. Um, he and Keenan did this whole show during the Olympics. It was like a late night funny show, and Intuit was a partner. And it was at the end of the episode they would do these like work harder, work smarter, clearly branded segments that taught. I mean, I learned something from this. It's hard to get branded segments to actually teach you something to get you excited. It was so subtle. It's a simple but powerful um kind of branded segment that I think like this is never, these type of things are never going to go away. Advertising's not going to go away. And so I think how we riff on the traditional brand integration into digital platforms is ripe for some interesting creative and not crazy wild things, but subtle, impactful collaboration. So I think there's a spectrum. There's the crazy ones, and those are awesome, and a lot of them are very cool. And there's also the simpler but impactful um, digital collaborations that I think will be great in the future too.
That's so interesting. It's true. I mean, I've seen, was it Liquid Death? They recently partnered with Yeti. and they have like
Oh,
I mean,
that's a great one.
that company is hilarious. I mean, they just yeah, and then you have those more subtle partnerships. Question is
Yeah.
your did the company your brother partner with, is it called Freshly?
No, so my brother's company is called Beso.
Okay.
He did a collaboration with Evie, who's the influencer around. It's a vermouth.
Huh.
So it's like for dirty martinis. Very creative, very vintage inspired. The whole vintage inspired
Hmm.
space is really blowing up right now,
Hmm.
probably because our generation is, has the purchasing power now, and so we love that. But um, it was a very cool and early. This is he's the founder of a pretty new company, and this was a pretty big partnership, and so I think there's room for even early stage growth companies to do really impactful things to kind of launch them onto a
Hmm.
broader stage that can be great. It doesn't have to be the Targets of the world.
There you go. And I agree. It's that's what's so exciting about collaboration. As we wrap up, it's about, to your point, you can have smaller brands, new brands partner with a behemoth or a medium-sized company, and
Mhm.
that sets them up for success, right? Because
Yeah.
it makes sense when there's alignment, to your point, all the the inner work has been done, the listening, and then
Yeah.
it launches off. And
Yeah.
so for listeners who want to build strong partnerships, but maybe don't have the same resources as Ted, what are three actionable steps that they can take to cultivate meaningful collaborations?
So I think a very simple framework, going back to my earlier business school comment. So understanding who your target audience is, who specifically, like, who are you trying to reach? What are other brands that are in that similar field? So I think audiences is such an important part of this strategy, is understanding who you're trying to reach, who they're trying to reach, and kind of merging those two. Um, and then the second would just be understanding kind of what you can offer and what they can offer, and making sure that those are generally aligned, and that there is an actual value add for them to do this with you and what that strategy is. And then the third is how each brand shows up. What are people going to take away from this partnership? How are they going to feel? How are they going to think? What are they going to do from this? And how is each brand participating in that, so that each of you can kind of have the long tail effect that you're kind of looking for beyond that, is kind of what are people going to remember, what are they going to think, do, feel, and what are they going to take away from it, and can you both benefit from that? And then having, like, and I tell my team this all the time, having uh kind of a target list of a bunch of options and trying to kind of establish these relationships and go out there with a real plan, not just a let's chat type strategy. um I think it can lead to great things.
This is so good. This is so good. So, Laura, lastly, of course, how can listeners connect with you and continue learning more about collaboration and partnerships? Are there any initiatives or master classes or
Yeah.
content that you'd like to tease for our audience?
So if you'd like to learn about TED partnerships, we have a website, tedpartnerships.com, and that goes through kind of all the different ways that we partner, which is interesting, and has all of the contact information for my team. Obviously, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love chatting with people. And we we have so many different ways that we partner. And so uh, you can engage with us through LinkedIn. You can see all of our kind of branded content on the TED Ideas YouTube page. That's our content studio. So our partnerships page is a perfect place to kind of start to understand more and to dive into all the things that we're doing, and just follow along, follow TED. I mean, we show up in many different ways there. We have our TED Next conference coming up in Atlanta, which is the kind of evolution of TED Women, expanding the TED into kind of a broader audience. It's for the next generation, and so tickets are still definitely available for that. And we have a lot of great partners showing up for that. So there's a lot of ways to connect with us.
I love it. I mean, this is the beauty of TED. You literally are everywhere. I mean,
Yeah,
you literally
yes.
are
A
everywhere.
little overwhelming even for me sometimes. Yes,
I mean, that's the thing, right?
yes,
200 people punching at the level of, top media companies, which you are in the world. So,
yeah.
Laura, this has been an incredible conversation. I mean, you've filled this entire space with so much in terms of value and insights. And so I just want to again thank you so much for taking time to share your journey, and just your expertise with us. Right, it's not every day you get to listen to Laura Beyer. So our
Thank
listeners will
you.
definitely. I mean, I'm leaving inspired and equipped. I've definitely added a new strategies to help elevate the collaborations I put in place. So Laura, thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you. And thank you for hosting this. I think this is such an interesting and sometimes overlooked topic that I love. And I can't wait to hear all the other guests that you've had on, because I think this is such an interesting space that you're kind of focusing on now. So thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. So listeners, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And again, this has been a wrap. Another episode of the Collabs. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and share with your friends who are passionate about collaboration. And until next time, keep collaborating and creating powerful relationships. Have a great day.
1, 2, 3.
Everything feel empty without you. Don't want a blessing without you.